Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winner. On this episode, David and Dan discuss the Twins' 2024 opener to spring training. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. It's here, Dan. The Super Bowl is over. The Chiefs have raised the trophy, but we don't even care, Dan. We don't care about the NFL because the only thing that matters is now that the Super Bowl is done, we turn our eyes to spring training and your 2024 Minnesota Twins.
I know somebody pointed out to me that it's actually basketball season still, but I don't really care about basketball season. The Timberwolves are in first place, and I can't even get on the bandwagon. I just don't care about the NBA because my heart is in Florida right now, David, with the Minnesota Twins fielding grounders, watching random videos of Christian Vasquez facing Johan Duran. It's the weirdest thing that we care so much about these little micro moments in spring training, but it's because we've been without baseball for so long.
No, we can sense it. Scroll on X and you see the clips, you're like, it's coming. It's coming. But folks, if you're new to the show, thanks for tuning in. Returning listeners, thanks as always for your support. This will not be our usual format. Typically, we have an episode after each Twins series, and we have segments that we run through. But in this particular episode, all we're going to talk about is the beginning of spring training, the roster, things that have happened, the moves that the front office have made. And let me tell you, Dan, we're always on high alert at this time because this is when the Twins front office tends to make their move right before and right at the beginning of spring training.
Sure.
And a couple of weeks ago, I woke up to a text from our third chair, Andrew Hogs Hoganson, that just said, Lewis, wow. And I'm in a straight panic. I don't know, did Royce get traded? Did they extend him? What on earth could have happened? So I'm frantically scrolling X to try and figure it out. Well, if you're a longtime listener of the show, you know I've recently gotten to F1, and this was actually in reference to Lewis Hamilton, not Royce Lewis, because Lewis Hamilton has moved to Ferrari for 2025, which is really big news in the F1 world, but it had nothing to do with Royce Lewis, and I am convinced Andrew Hogs Hoganson did that on purpose to frighten me, Dan Thompson.
I am not throwing away my shot.
I think that sounds like something Hogs would do. But here's the thing. I love that his last name is Hamilton. That joke was not made, right? It was just Royce and not Hamilton. If they had mentioned that, then I would have been in a tizzy. It was also early in the morning and I'm in the West Coast. And so I caught up after the joke had been made. But yes, thank goodness he's healthy. He's one of the guys that's been fielding grounders and touching his foot to the bases. And it's just anyway. David, I want games though. Games soon, hopefully, because there's only so much of that footage I can watch.
It's fun to get a taste, but yes, all you want to see is real live game action here. I did have a question for you, Dan. Our last episode, obviously, was totally dedicated to Joe Mauer's first ballot Hall of Fame. What do they call it? It's not his induction. What do they call that here? Because he's not inducted yet.
It was the announcement of his induction or something like
there
that.
It is.
He had been selected to be in the Hall of Fame. There's a lot of steps. But yes, I am still excited about that. I don't exactly wake up every morning kissing my Joe Mauer poster or anything like that. But I'm excited for it. I wish that it would make sense for us, to go as a podcast. But then I look at the pictures of all of the people who are there for those ceremonies, and it's I might as well just watch it on TV. I'm not going to be in the front 15 rows, right? So I may as well just sit in my air-conditioned building and watch the ceremony from there and let the tears just stream down my eyes, David.
Yeah, I would rather watch that ceremony at home and take the money I would have spent on that trip and take a killer road trip here to follow the Twins at some point this season.
That would be pretty cool. And we'll get to talk about that at a future episode. I saw that in the notes. David, I got to compliment the spreadsheet. You have notes for the next 5 or 6 episodes all laid out. It's seemingly you have predicted the future. The Twins are going to somehow sign Eddie Rosario, to be that outfielder, another left-handed power-hitting outfielder, because goodness knows they need one more of those. I'm excited about that. Now, you have a note here about the City Connect jerseys, and I still cannot quite understand what this is. Can you explain what the City Connect jerseys are?
Yeah, so Nike and the MLB and New Era, or whoever all comes into play for this, they come up with this sort of off-the-wall, different alternate logo logo style for several teams over the course of the last couple of seasons, and now the Twins, their turn has finally come. So people are excited. If you're on Instagram, you can follow all of these people have made sort of their mock-ups of what they think they're going to look like. Two things. I hope they don't use MSP. I've seen that in a couple of the mock-ups. I really don't care for that at all. Like, if you want to separate M and the S or something along those lines, that's fine. But don't give me MSP like the airport. That's all anybody's ever going to think about. And secondly, the pink, like, graffiti neon lettering, don't give me that either. Give me something different than those two things, and I'm sure I'll love it.
Can I tell you what I'd like?
Yeah.
I want North Star's colors. That's what I want. I want the green and the yellow. I've already got that hat, which, by the way, David, I need to put on my M hat as well. Mine is not, gray like yours, but I've come around to the logo, David. I'm all on board with the M with the North Star above it. Count me in.
I think we've both sort of joined that bandwagon, I will say. We were both skeptical. That was the part of the rebranding we did not care for. But look at us now, Dan. Look at us. Two of us wearing these hats that everyone would confuse as Marlin logos at the beginning of last season. But now they know. Now they know the true M hat is for your Minnesota Twins.
It doesn't take very long. It doesn't take too long to forget. Well, I wanted to also talk about one of the Twins' rivals. You know how I love the Twins' rivals so much, David. I have so much respect, especially for, of course, the Kansas City Royals. Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be torturing the Twins now for the next 11 years, $289 million. And this is one of my questions for you. Would you give Royce that deal now, or would you wait until he's played another 60 games?
Okay, I understand that you and Hogs have this perspective that he is the guy.
You are the chosen one.
But he's only played like 60 games at the major league level. Like, you guys gotta chill. You do the same thing every season. It's Buxton. You're 100% on the Buxton train. If only he is healthy. And then Royce, at least Buxton, there were flashes of greatness for a longer period of time. But Royce, I get it. He's played 10 games and he hit 6 grand slams. I understand why that is very attractive and very easy to get hyped about. But you guys gotta pump the brakes a little bit. The expectations you're putting upon Royce are a little bit insane, I'd say.
Do you think that I put more expectations on Royce than we ever did of Buxton? I mean, do you think this is a different level of gloriation? That's not the word. Something like that.
Yeah, your hype is definitely higher than it was with Buxton with less evidence, I guess. And here's I think that Royce could be great. I really do. And obviously he's shown flashes of greatness, but it's not that he's shown flashes of greatness, is that's all we've seen is a flash, Dan. It's not like he's had like this, like, oh, here's this 2-week span where he played really well. No, the 2 weeks is all that he played. Like, you can't, there's not even enough time for a flash to register. There's not even time for the flash to show as an anomaly because there's not enough normalcy to pull from to see it as a flash, Dan.
Ogres are like onions.
Something like that, yes. The flash in the pan, I suppose, is something related there. I'm super excited that we're hopefully going to see a fully healthy Twins team because we hear Carlos Correa is in the best shape of his life now as well. He shortened his swing. Byron Buxton is going to play 175 games in center field this season. He's feeling that good. It's just overall, the roster just seems to be tip-top right now.
One other piece of news here, Dan, before we get to the rosters. The Twins TV deal for 2024 has been announced. They are signing a 1-year deal with Bally Sports North. And Dan, this is the opposite direction that the Twins have made it seem as though they were going to go, because originally they made it sound like it was either going to be through Amazon or through MLB, and there were going to be no blackouts, and there were going to be opportunities for streaming all over the place in Twins territory. However, Dan, now that they've signed this deal, there's no streaming options in network. You got to have cable or you got to be out of network and use MLB TV. And what's probably the most frustrating to Twins fans, Dan, is a lot of the talk about the payroll reduction had to do with this TV deal. However, now they've come out and said, oh yes, we've signed a TV deal. We're not sure how much money it's worth, to be fair. It might not be the whole $55 million, but you got to think it's a decent chunk of that. However, now they're saying, well, there's still no increase in payroll because that was just one factor, which I think is what fans are most annoyed about, is because this team, Dan, won the AL Central, broke the longest streak in professional sports history as far as playoff losses are concerned, and you can't find it in your hearts to push some chips into the middle and spend a little bit of money, and you're like, no, now that we have success, we should reduce the payroll. And now the reason, the whole crutch that you were leaning upon in order to tell fans why you needed to reduce payroll has been kicked out from under you, and now you're sitting there without a leg to stand on, really, to explain to the fans why this team that has been so successful last season isn't getting upgrades that it desperately needs to be a true contender, now that you know you're pocketing money instead of increasing streaming options for a fan base that, again, is sort of starved for options for how to watch your product.
I do think that this is a baseball issue as much as it is a Twins issue, because they need to figure out a plan to get away from this archaic blackout system that that does nobody any good. You've heard me complain before about how the poor state of Iowa, those poor Iowans down there, have 5 teams blacked out, which is ridiculous. And I think just in the age of streaming, and if you want to build a global brand, it just seems silly to limit your home fans. And people are going to pay. They'd pay the $150 a year, whatever it might be. Or they already have Amazon Prime. And, I think it gets a little bit messy if it's going to be kind of all over the place, but baseball needs to figure that out. And the commissioner has said that that's a priority going forward. And I think we've learned one thing about Commissioner Manfred is that he actually does get some things done that he decides he's going to get done. So I am hopeful that this is a 1-year blip. But to your point about the payroll and such, I don't love that reasoning either. And I think it's double talk in a lot of ways. I do wonder, does that mean that maybe they would spend some money, closer to the trade deadline, or once they want to see where this team is in the standings? But where would you add right now? Like what piece would you want anyway?
Yeah, so I think we need, as we've sort of alluded to, we need a right-handed hitting outfielder, someone who can provide protection for Buxton in center field, certainly. And honestly, if you have the money, there are still starting pitchers out there, Dan, who are worth signing. And I understand that we have a full rotation. We'll talk about that in a moment. But to me, it doesn't make any sense that this team wouldn't be willing to invest when they're the best setup for success they've been in the last 10 years, I'd say.
Well, I think that transitions well into just kind of talking through where this roster is now and kind of how it got to be. We've got the big trade in the offseason was, of course, Jorge Polanco being traded to Seattle for 4 players. Anthony Desclafini, a starting pitcher. Justin Topa, a relief pitcher who I think is maybe the best current piece of this. And then a couple prospects, Gabriel Gonzalez, who is already in the MLB 100, top 100. He's towards the bottom of that, but he's still there. And then also Darren Bowen, kind of a low A starting pitcher. So I think all things considered, we would think this is a pretty good haul, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's hard to see Jorge go. Obviously, the longest tenured Twin. People know him. There's a ton of Polanco jerseys when you go to Target Field. He's well liked. He had the issue with the steroids and whatnot when he was coming back from injury. And I think some people forget about that. But he's had some really good seasons for us, and it's really hard to see him go. But at the same time, Dan, the more I looked at this trade and examined it after the fact, if Twins fans found out this was the offer that was made for Jorge Polanco and the Twins didn't take it, I think they would be absolutely furious, because I think this return is honestly, it's ridiculous. I think the Twins won this trade hands down, even if Polanco returns to his 2017 All-Star form, which I just don't really see happening. I still think that the Twins got the better end of this deal.
I was reading an article out here actually from the Seattle Times, Ryan Divish, who covers the Mariners, and he was talking about how Jorge Polanco is actually a great fit for the Mariners now, provided he's healthy, because they've just had a rotating list of guys go through and try to play second base. They just haven't had a consistent one. So in that sense, if the Mariners get a couple good seasons out of Jorge Polanco where he's healthy, but that's been the sticking point. The Twins couldn't count on him to be healthy, and with a glut of middle infielders in the system, where a lot of your top talent is, this trade had to be made. But it is a shame, and I think I even saw some other people I think it was Gleeman made the point that, Polanco's probably a Twins Hall of Famer at some point here, just for how much he's contributed to this team. And out of that group of guys that came up together with him and Kepler and Miguel Sano, what a career that Polanco did have.
I mean, speaking of the Twins Hall of Fame, which I would argue is a significant step down from the Baseball Hall of Fame, Stelmazik and Ryan are both to enter the Twins Hall of Fame. I don't know if we care, but I guess we should mention it because it's on the spreadsheet. But that being said, I always cheer for Twins players when they leave the organization for the most part. But Polanco is one who, yes, I hold quite dear, and I do think that he's one who I would cheer even more for, right? So as long as the Mariners aren't playing the Twins, I will always be cheering for Jorge Polanco.
By the way, are we talking about Terry Ryan being inducted into the Twins Hall of Fame?
Yes, not okay. I don't know which other Ryan.
Joe Ryan?
He's just really, they're doing some prediction stuff here. He's definitely going to be in the Twins Hall of Fame.
Gotcha. And then there was a couple other deals here. The Carlos Santana signing was kind of we thought maybe the Twins would make 2 moves, one for a right-handed outfielder, which as of this, they haven't yet. But then Santana to be a platoon with Kirilloff at first, so almost in the spot that Donovan Solano was. I do like his deal. One thing that's been pointed out other places too is that he's a great defender, and to have a first baseman who can play great defense. And we saw some times when Kirilloff or whomever else was playing first base last year just wasn't quite making the plays that you hope that they would make. But is he too old? He's going to be 38, or he's 38 already.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think that they're going to give Kirilloff every opportunity to perform, assuming he stays healthy. But yeah, having Santana as that late game replacement from a defensive perspective, or as a pinch hitter off the bench, or serving as DH, the big thing that Santana brings to this team that they desperately need compared with last season is some discipline at the plate. He doesn't strike out a lot. And so I think that he can be sort of that Nelson Cruz type sort of leadership in the clubhouse, and sort of that perspective of helping with plate discipline discipline. I think when you see someone with a steady hand at the plate, that can rub off on guys. It is going to be weird, though, seeing Santana in a Twins jersey, because we've seen him in a Guardians jersey for so long. I mean, and an Indians jersey before that, right? Like, you think Carlos Santana, you connect him immediately with the Guardians. So to see someone who's been that long tenured in the AL Central make a move to the Twins is going to be fun to be cheering for him, but still feel a little bit funny.
Kind of like Jim Thome, right? I mean, Thome made the rounds around the rest of the Central. Now, I would say that this is not as significant of a signing as Thome, just because he was so good when he was here for just the 2 seasons that he was with the Twins. So hopefully this does work out for him and for the Twins, and this is a good signing. But I think we agree, they still need another outfielder here. And hopefully, it could be a guy like Michael Taylor. I wouldn't mind having him back, given the price right now. They'd probably be able to get him for a couple $2 million, and the defense that he plays and the stability that he provides. And he can also play the corners if Buxton is indeed going to be healthy enough to play center.
I know that Byron Buxton keeps saying that he's going to be in center field this season. I will believe it when I see it. All reports point to that being the case. It's not bait and switch here from the Twins front office trying to get fans excited about the season. It does seem as though Buxton's going to be in center field. But to not have a backup plan, which we saw for many a season prior to the Michael A. Taylor signing last season, to not have a backup plan is foolish. And I think you're right. I think that either signing Taylor or Duvall, or here's the thing. This is what I really want to see this Twins front office do. And I realize this would be another big signing and it doesn't make a ton of sense, but Bellinger's available. I know that he's going to need a big deal with lots of money, but maybe you can pull sort of what you did with Correa, where no one's willing to give him the deal that he wants. And so he wants a 1-year prove-it deal. Give him a ton of money for 1 season. And I know that you had mentioned the trade deadline and adding pieces at the trade deadline, but Dan, you can't forget all that free agents cost is money. The farm system loses nothing when you're signing free agents. But if you're waiting for the trade deadline to say to the team, hey, you got to prove it, that's a little bit ridiculous, Dan, because you're going to have to hurt your future at the trade deadline for present success. And that's not wise when you're given the opportunity to improve the team as it stands now for just money, of which the owners have a lot of money, Dan, that they should be willing to spend on this team.
Don't give me hope.
David, am I supposed to think that Cody Bellinger is going to sign with the Minnesota Twins on a 1-year prove-it deal? Because I'm on board. It was a great defense of the argument here. It makes so much sense now. You mentioned Correa and the precedent. Can Correa bring him in for dinner? Maybe Buxton. Maybe they can all go out on the boat together, right? It's been warm enough in Minnesota, right? Lake Minnetonka's not frozen over yet. Can they all go out and have a wonderful time? And then, because, once somebody comes and visits Minnesota, David, they never want to leave, right? They see the beauty. My other question for you, though, is how is Cody Bellinger shoveling? Is he better than Alex Rodriguez? Does he know what the proper path is?
I would think so. I mean, he spent so much time in Chicago. I'm sure that he's lifted a shovel or two in his day, Dan.
Anyway, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to sign Cody Bellinger. I think they're going to go on the cheap.
Yeah, definitely. I think they'll try and get Michael A. Taylor back because honestly, he's going to be the only option left here after a while. I just think that it would be nice from sort of the hometown feel of like bringing Taylor back because we know him and he was such a good player for us last season. But I think bringing in a game changer like Bellinger would really confuse the fan base in such a fun way. Like they would be like, wait, what's happening? Like that's how we felt when Correa got signed, right? Same idea. That's what I'm saying. I think that the front office to make a move like that no one would expect to really increase the prospects of this team just would make a ton of sense.
I would love that. I mean, that would be super fantastic. But alas, don't think it's going to happen.
Another quick free agent signing, the Twins signed Joe Jackson, who spent a lot of time in a lot of places in a lot of different leagues throughout the world. He's sort of a low leverage bullpen arm, but I'm guessing he will make the team out of camp, depending on a couple of the other young guys who have an opportunity to earn a roster spot. But it does seem like the Twins are just trying to stockpile as much bullpen depth as possible, Dan. They want to give Rocco every possible option.
They do, and they even gave him another lefty. They traded Nick Gordon, again with the Marlins. Maybe it's the logo. Maybe there's something about these two teams that likes to trade it together after the Pablo Lopez and Luis Arraez trade. But they traded Nick Gordon for left-handed reliever Steven Okert, who gives them another option. But they have so many guys for this bullpen and not enough space. It basically forces them to keep the veterans at this point and to then send a bunch of guys back to AAA. But I feel like there's not going to be a lot of drama there. But also during spring training last season, we saw them let go of players that got picked up and had pretty decent years elsewhere. The Baltimore reliever comes to mind. But this is weird, the stockpiling, David, because at this time last year, the Twins were worried they didn't have enough arms, and yet they started giving away guys like Yenier Cano, who ended up having a pretty dang good year with Baltimore. So I'm curious to see how this all shakes out. It makes it so that I think Cody Funderburk is basically not going to be part of this bullpen.
Yes, I think that's likely the case. Funderburk is probably the first to go. But then Alcala is also likely to be stashed at AAA. The Twins also picked up Weiss. I think he was a Reds reliever here. He didn't pass through waivers, so the Twins made a claim on him. But yeah, I think those guys will be stashed at AAA as depth options if anybody who are in our current reliever stable are unable, Dan, to make do.
Well, and I think the guy who's really suffering here, David, is Jordan Belizovic, who was kicked off the 40-man, much like he was kicked out of a bar in spring training about this time last year. But I gotta say, Dave, this is a real punch in the face.
Terrible pun. Yes. But Belizovic, he did clear through waivers, so he did get a non-roster invite to camp. I don't know if he'll find success somehow, but obviously that guy's got some problems. I don't know that he's going to be able to succeed at the major league level unless he gets himself straightened out and has a little bit more discipline. You don't just get punched in the face randomly, Dan. I mean, I guess it's probably happened in history twice, right? Like the rest of them, definitely there was some provocation. It wasn't just random. Some guy came up and punched you in the face.
You don't think it was? You think he might have done something to escalate the escalation?
Yes.
To escalate the confrontation?
There's no question in my mind that's the case here, Dan.
Last thing I wanted to say about him, he used to be one of these, top 100 baseball prospects. So I think you just never know. You really never know. Unless it's a guy like Wally Jenkins. And then I think we're pretty sure that he's going to be, if it's not Royce Lewis, David, it's going to be not Walter, Walker Jenkins. I'm going to get his name right one of these times.
It's amazing, Dan. But yeah, no invite to camp for Walker Jenkins. And some people are like, well, of course not. He was only just signed. He's only played like in 20 professional games. But it's really not out of the question for high first round draft picks to get invited to big league camp just to sort of experience what that's like and to spend time along MLB talent. So I was a little disappointed that he got left off the non-roster invite list. But we should go through that really quick. I just want to break down what the current roster looks like. I'm going to take care of the position players, Dan, and then we'll have you walk through the rotation and relievers. But so this is who I have as our locks currently for position players. So we have Julian at second, Buxton in center, Correa at short, Lewis at third. Nothing's changing that anytime soon. Then we have Santana at DH, Kirilloff at first, Kepler in right, Wallner in left, and Jeffers catching. Then on the bench, Dan, I think that these three are locks without question. Farmer obviously is a lock. Castro, I would say, is a lock, and Vasquez as the second tier catcher, also a lock. There's an interesting article at The Athletic. I forget if it was Hayes or Gleeman who wrote it, talking about how Vasquez is really hoping to bounce back and how disappointed he was to not have a role in the postseason last season. Hopefully that's the case, and hopefully he can sort of return to form when he's a guy who's won a couple of World Series, Dan. So you know that he can produce when he needs to. But so the question really becomes, who gets that last spot on the bench? And at this point, I think odds-on favorite is probably Miranda, I guess, is where my heart would say.
I was just looking at that because he's going to have every shot to be able to come back and earn a spot. Go figure.
I am not throwing away my shot.
We'll see. We'll see.
Had to be
he's gonna start DHing, I guess, in the spring because he's still working through his shoulder rehab. But they're hoping by the end of spring training that he'll be taking reps at first base. I don't. Maybe Martin, right? Could be Larnach is probably the long shot here because he's a righty bat, but he's a corner outfielder, not a center fielder. Those are probably the only three who really have a chance, I'd say, out of camp.
I think so. That's what makes another signing seem so imminent because, but at the same time, last year they had an opportunity and then they signed Joey Gallo, of all people, to be able to be that extra guy.
Well, don't worry, be happy.
That may be the last time we hear that sounder about Joey Gallo, Dan. Maybe if he's in the news or if he's like hitting like 45 home runs this season, we'll talk about him a little bit. But I think we may not get as much use out of that sounder this season.
Well, let me go through the rotation and then the bullpen. So we've got, for rotation locks, we think it's going to be Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober, Chris Paddock, and then Disclafini, who you can get a Mariners jersey, by the way, with his name on it for $394, David. So get them while you can.
You mean $3.94?
No, I mean $394. There's still a couple left. I was just looking. So it could be had. But then for the relievers, we've got Duran, Topa, Thielbar, who seems to be as old as me, I think, David. Griffin Jacks, Stalmont, Stewart, who I'm still wondering if he's going to be healthy enough to actually, I'm just not convinced that he's going to be healthy all the way through. And then Okert and Jackson. That is a really veteran bullpen that we have seen ranked in the top 3 baseball wide by a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that obviously a lot of that rests upon Duran, Topa, Thielbar, and Jacks is sort of the heavy back end sort of big arms that Rocco can call upon. But even, for other options, like we mentioned, you have Funderburk and Alcala if they need to be called upon. But I think the interesting case, because of the way that the rotation has shook out and the relievers have sort of continually been added to, is Louis Varland is definitely going to stay stretched out as a starter, or at the very least a long relief option out of the bullpen. He's been working on an additional pitch to hopefully hopefully keep his sort of sights set on being a starter for this Minnesota Twins team. A lot of the projection systems, Dan, had him as a guy who was like around the 4.00 ERA range and, pitching quite a few innings. So I think he could still be that guy, but I don't know that he is in the exact same position as Bailey Ober is. He is in that he's probably the sixth starter, or almost without a doubt he's the sixth starter. But really the question becomes, is he good enough to fit in that fifth starter role over any of the other guys who are in the rotation currently? And I think not. Whereas last season, Ober was kind of seems like he should be there.
That's a really good point. I don't think that Varland comes out of camp to be that guy, but we saw so quickly last year Maeda get hurt and then Ober's up, and just like that, Ober's not leaving until, not really being part of the rotation in the month of September, it seemed. The other guy you have to keep an eye on is Simeon Woods Richardson. This is one of his kind of prove it seasons left. There's always, of course, Sands and Winder to kind of fill in. I'm sure we'll see them make a few starts or, a couple relief appearances throughout the season, because we're going to see all these guys at some point, all these guys in the 40-man. Well, basically, it's almost a guarantee that they'll get some at-bats or some innings going forward here. But I don't like I don't think there's as much depth here as we saw maybe this time last year, because I think Bailey Ober is, like you said, he's just a more proven commodity than Louis Varland.
Yeah, I think that he went into the season thinking I should be on the major league roster, and I don't know that Varland could say that from the rotation perspective. Again, I think he probably has the talent to do it, but he doesn't seem as of sure footing as Ober was last season. One other note here that's been making the rounds is that Dave Festa, who's in the minors for the Twins currently, he's sort of been tagged as the other guy who might be able to make some starts for this team this season, as he's been making his way through the minor league system, and they actually say some guys put him above Woods Richardson for the next guy to get called upon to make some starts for this team this season.
And you can't forget about Randy Dobnak, the $2 million man down there in St. Paul, making, I think that's the deal, right? He's still on a $2 million deal every year?
I think through 28, I think.
Oh, man.
I thought it was more than $2 million, though, wasn't it? I thought it was like 2.9 or something.
Maybe. I thought it was 5 for 10 or something like that. But
it was basically a Costco deal. The Twins were walking down the aisle here, and they're like, how many Dobnaks do I need to purchase here?
Well, it's going to be fun, David, I think, just to kind of see how all these pieces shake out in spring training, because somebody always surprises, and another thing we didn't say before, but Nico Goodrum is in camp with the Twins too, and he's been around quite a bit. Major League Baseball, he's a former Twins player who kind of has found his way back. And I just wonder, is there like a Willie Castro, somewhere here where the Twins are going to be able to sign somebody and claim them up and just maybe make them that super utility guy?
I don't think so. I think that's a very rare thing to take place, and Willie Castro just happened to be that guy who came in and he knew what he would need to do to keep a spot on this roster, and he exceeded everyone's expectations to make sure that he got a roster spot for this season. I think that happens just not often enough for us to sort of assume that it could happen again this season. I just think it's such a long shot, Dan. As I've been reading more and more articles, Dan, getting ready for the season and reading all of the different posts from the national guys and the local guys, the Twins currently, according to the Athletics power rankings, are 11th coming into the season. Now, I don't know. I think maybe that's a little bit low, but there are a lot of good baseball teams ahead of them. But what's interesting, Dan, is the team that's next in the AL Central is the Tigers, and they're ranked 22nd. I think that if this team does not win the AL Central this season, that is such a disappointment and so short of expectations that something would have happened that was astronomically terrible from like an injury perspective, or so much would need to go wrong for this team not to win the AL Central. And I'm not one of those guys who's like, oh, I like to count all my chickens before they hatch. No, I tend to be more cautious in my optimism about this team. But truly, Dan, this team is the better baseball team. And even if they get a little bit of luck from the injury perspective, this team should win a lot of baseball games.
I'm just looking at this roster and I think, gosh, we talked about this earlier, how, another starting pitcher would be nice because the rotation doesn't look as good right now as it did 12 months ago. But the lineup is very injury dependent, I suppose, or recovery dependent. But the talent is certainly there. And we have heard Byron Buxton talking. I know we talked about him earlier with his knee, but he says he's waking up without pain in his knee, but that he was feeling like knives in his knee every day that he got up last year. No wonder he couldn't play center field if that's what it was feeling like. If he's really feeling well enough to talk about it as publicly as this, then hopefully he is. And I think we're more looking at, does he sustain a new injury versus does this one flare up? And that is a different place there too. And we look at Carlos Correa, who played with that plantar fasciitis all of last season. And I called that, by the way, that he was dealing with that and he was struggling. Yay, Dan. But, if he's really healthy, he's shortened to swing. We have an optimism here that I think is not founded on false hope. I think this is founded on, a pretty proven floor that we got last season. We talked about how many guys had a career worst season last year that we got to hope for better.
You would think so. I think Correa is the obvious bounce back candidate. He was actually featured on an MLB.com list about the most improved for this season, likely. And Pablo is listed as a favorite for the Cy Young, which is pretty fun to have a Twins pitcher even mentioned in those articles. Other two guys here who are getting a little bit of buzz, both Kepler and Jeffers were named to the all MLB underrated team for this potential season. And Dan, your guy, I hate to say it, but Royce Lewis, I've seen him on multiple lists listed as MLB candidates for most valuable player, which again, I don't know who's writing these articles, but he got onto the big stage. He made some noise, obviously. I'm a huge Royce Lewis fan. Do not get me wrong. And as Hogs has pointed out previously, it's really hard when he comes up to the plate with anybody on base that you're not thinking, well, of course he's going to hit a home run. However, we need to chill. We need to chill as Twins fans a little bit. Let him play more than 10 games in a row, and then maybe we can start talking about what his aspirations for the season should be.
You underestimate my power.
I think so, David. I don't like equating him to Anakin Skywalker. Like, that feels like we're setting ourselves up for a huge betrayal, David.
It shows you how much context matters, Dan, with these sounders.
Well, David, this is so nice to be able to do this again, and to be able to have this conversation. We talked, obviously, about Joe Mauer, and I was kind of in an euphoric state. A euphoric state. What am I talking about? I'm not even in full season form yet, but this will be fun. We will have episodes kind of about once a week here throughout spring training. I also, David, as far as I know, don't have any plans to go to a foreign country at the beginning of the season, so I should be able to be here through that first week of baseball, and it won't be you and Hogs kind of carrying the torch early on.
Yeah, I'm happy about that, Dan, here, because I felt like we took a little bit longer to get into the groove than we normally would, because you just felt you needed to travel the world here as opposed to watching this beloved baseball team.
It's a long season, David. It's a long season.
All right, well, with that, Dan, I think that'll do it. You want to go ahead and send us out?
Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook page. You can also find us on Instagram. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a like or a rating, we'd greatly appreciate that. If you'd like to support the show further, you can also find us on Patreon. We would love to have more people down there. And thank you for listening. And as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.